You're standing in your kitchen, the power's been out 2 days, and there's good meat in a warm freezer that's slowly turning into a loss you can't afford. You open the lid, you smell it, and a small voice in your head says, "My grandmother never had this problem. She didn't, not once." And here's the claim I want you to sit with. For most of human history, ordinary people kept meat safe for months, sometimes a full year, with no electricity, no refrigerator, and no special equipment. They did it with salt, smoke, fat, and a little know-how that got quietly erased from our memory in a single generation. I'm going to show you the exact methods, and I'm saving the strangest one for the end. It comes from a device patented in Western Australia in the 1890s, built by a railway worker, and it can keep raw meat cool in a hot room, using nothing but water and a wet cloth. No motor, no power bill. You can build it this weekend with things already in your house. And I promise you this, none of what I'm about to share costs much of anything. It worked for people poorer than you and me. It'll work in the home you already have. I remember the first time I understood how badly we'd been fooled. It was a July afternoon, maybe 15 years back, and I was standing in my late Aunt Ruth's pantry in rural Ohio after her funeral, holding a heavy brown crock I'd never noticed before. It was sealed with a cap of hard white fat, and under it sat pork she'd put down the previous autumn. 9 months, no refrigeration. It smelled clean, faintly of sage, and I realized I was 58 years old, and nobody had ever once told me this was possible. That crock changed how I think about food, money, and what we've allowed ourselves to forget. So let me hand it to you the way I wish somebody had handed it to me. Let's start with the oldest trick there is, because everything else builds on it. Salt. Now you already know salt preserves meat. That's not the secret. The secret is how, and how much, and why the version most people vaguely remember doesn't actually work. Because here's what nobody explains. Salt doesn't just flavor the meat, it pulls the water out of it. Bacteria need moisture to grow. Take the water away, and you take away their whole world. Scientists have a name for this now. They call it reducing the water activity. But a farm wife in 1840 knew it in her hands long before anyone wrote it in a book. Here's the method that actually works, the way it was done. You take coarse salt, not the fine table stuff, and you don't sprinkle it. You bury the meat. You pack a layer of salt in the bottom of a crock or a wooden box, you lay the meat on it, and you cover every single surface so no bare spot touches air. For a slab of pork belly or a ham, you're using roughly 1 pound of salt for every 10 pounds of meat as your starting layer, and then you keep it packed. The salt draws out a brine over the first few days. In the old accounts, they'd pour that liquid off and repack with fresh salt, because the brine that pools is water leaving the meat, and you want it gone. You keep it somewhere cool, a cellar or a north-facing room, around 38 to 40 degrees if you can manage it, and you leave a ham in that salt for a day and a half per pound of weight. A 12-pound ham sits in salt for roughly 18 days. That's not a guess. That ratio shows up again and again in old curing manuals going back well over a century. When it comes out, it's firm, dense, and it will keep for months in a cool, dark place. This is what a country ham is. This is what prosciutto is. It's the same idea the whole world figured out independently, from Virginia to Italy to China, because it's simple and it's true. Do you feel that? That little jolt of, wait, it's really that basic? Hold on to it, because the next question is the one that got me angry. If it's this simple, this cheap, and this reliable, Why did almost every one of us grow up not knowing it? Here's where the story turns, and I need you to stay with me, because this is the part that made me realize we didn't forget by accident. For thousands of years, the salt box and the smokehouse weren't hobbies. They were survival. Every household that ate meat had a way to keep it. Then something happened in a very short window of time. The home refrigerator arrived. The first ones for regular houses showed up in the 1920s, and by the late 1930s and into the 1950s, they were in millions of American kitchens. And an entire industry realized something. If they could convince people that the only safe way to keep food was a machine you plug in and pay for, forever, they'd have a customer for life. So the marketing didn't just sell a cold box, it sold fear of the old ways. Salt curing got painted as primitive, dangerous, dirty, something poor people did because they didn't know better. The cookbooks stopped printing the methods. Home economics classes dropped them. In one generation, a skill that had passed unbroken from mother to daughter for 1,000 years simply stopped being taught. My Aunt Ruth's crock survived because she was stubborn and grew up during the Depression, when throwing away food was close to a sin. Most families lost the thread completely. And here's the part that ought to make your jaw tighten. It was never that the old ways didn't work. They worked so well that armies marched on them and ships crossed oceans on them. It's that a preserved ham hanging in your cellar doesn't make anybody a monthly payment. A humming machine does. Your dependence became somebody's revenue. I'm not telling you to throw out your refrigerator. I've got one. I'm telling you that you were quietly stripped of a choice, and choices are exactly what keep an older person independent when the power fails, when money's tight, or when you just want to know you could feed yourself no matter what. So let's get that choice back. Because salt is only the first door, and the next method solves the one thing salt alone can't. Here's the problem with salt curing on its own. It preserves, but it can leave meat hard and very salty, and it doesn't protect against every threat if your cellar's a little too warm or a little too damp. The old-timers knew this, so they paired salt with a second force, one that's been used since before recorded history: smoke. Now think about what smoke actually does, because it's cleverer than it looks. When you slow smoke meat over a smoldering fire, 3 things happen at once. The gentle heat dries the surface even further. The smoke coats the meat in compounds, things like formaldehyde and various acids that naturally form in wood smoke, that kill bacteria and stop fats from going rancid, and it lays down a dry, sealed outer skin that keeps new moisture and new bugs from getting in. Archaeologists have found smoking pits dating back tens of thousands of years. This is one of the oldest technologies our species has, older than the wheel, older than writing. The method the old farmers used was cold smoking, and this is where people go wrong today. Cold smoking isn't cooking. You keep the temperature low, under about 90 degrees, so the meat is bathed in smoke without ever heating up enough to cook. You'd salt cure the meat first, the way I just described, then hang it in a small smokehouse and keep a low, smoldering hardwood fire going, hickory, oak, apple, or maple, for anywhere from several days to 2 weeks depending on the piece. You don't need a barn-sized smokehouse. Country people built tiny ones, no bigger than an outhouse. Some ran a stovepipe from a firebox dug into the ground several feet away, so by the time the smoke reached the meat, it had cooled down. That gap between the fire and the meat is the whole trick. The distance cools the smoke. A properly salt-cured, cold-smoked ham hung in a dry, cool place will keep for a year. That's not folklore. That's how Virginia country hams were made, and some of them are still aged a year or more before anyone eats them. The salt handles the inside, the smoke handles the outside. Together they close every gap. But here's what stopped me cold when I first learned it. Smoke and salt protect the surface and pull out water, but there's a third old method that does something completely different. Instead of drying meat out, it seals air away entirely. And it's the reason my Aunt Ruth's crock still smelled like fresh pork after 9 months. Let me tell you about fat, because this one feels almost too good to be true, and it's the method I use most in my own home now. The technique has a French name that makes it sound fancy, confit, but poor country people across Europe did it for centuries and called it nothing special. Here's the idea. Bacteria and mold need oxygen. Take away the oxygen, and most of them simply cannot grow. Fat, once it hardens, is a perfect airtight seal. It's waterproof, it's airtight, and it happens to be delicious. So here's what they did, and what I do. You take pieces of meat, pork, duck, goose, whatever you've got, and you salt them for a day to draw out surface moisture and season them through. Then you cook them slowly, completely submerged in their own melted fat or lard, at a low temperature, a gentle 200 degrees or so, until they're meltingly tender. This slow cook in fat, not water, matters, because water would carry bacteria and spoil, but rendered fat won't. Then you pack the cooked meat down into a clean crock, and you pour the strained, melted fat over the top until every piece is buried and there's a solid cap of fat, at least an inch, sealing the surface. As it cools, that fat turns hard and white and locks the meat away from all air. You keep the crock somewhere cool and dark, and that meat will keep for months. In the old days, families made this in autumn when they slaughtered and ate from the same crock all winter, digging out a piece, then smoothing the fat back over what remained. That's what I was holding in Ruth's pantry. Pork, cooked down in autumn, sealed under its own lard, still good in high summer. She'd been quietly doing what her mother taught her, while the rest of us paid the electric company to do a worse job. Now I can feel the skeptic in you, because I was that skeptic. I thought, there's no way sealing meat in fat on a shelf is safe. That's how you poison somebody. So I did the reading, and here's what I found, and I want you to hear this part carefully because it matters. There is one real danger with any airtight, low-oxygen storage of low-acid food like meat, and it has a name: botulism. It's rare, but it's serious, and the old-timers managed it with 2 things they took for granted: cold and salt. The confit crock was always kept genuinely cold, in a cellar near 40 degrees, not on a warm kitchen shelf, and the meat was always salted first. Those 2 conditions together are what kept it safe for centuries. So if you try this, and I hope you do, you keep it truly cool, you salt properly, and you heat the meat thoroughly before you eat it. Do that, and you're doing exactly what generations did safely. The knowledge includes the safety. That's the part the fear marketing conveniently left out. They told us the old ways were dangerous without ever telling us the old ways came with their own rules that made them safe. Which brings me to the layer under all of this, the thing that made every one of these methods possible: temperature. And this is where I need to talk directly to some of you. I know a lot of you are watching this on a careful, fixed income. Maybe you're alone. Maybe money is counted to the dollar every month, and part of you has been thinking, this is all fine for somebody with a farm and a smokehouse and money for crocks and salt, but not for me. I put this next part in the video specifically for you because it costs almost nothing, and it's the piece that ties everything together. Here's the truth the old folks knew. You don't need a machine to make cold. You need to understand where cold already lives and how to move it and hold it, and every single one of you already owns the tools. And if you want to go deeper into exactly how to take that dependence apart, piece by piece, I've put everything I know about this into a book, Smart Starts, if you're just beginning to build back these skills, or Deeper Frugal if you're ready to go further, and the full system if you want the whole picture in one place. You'll find the link in the description below. Now, I'm not telling you to throw out your refrigerator. Start with the simplest thing, the salt box itself. A wooden box, or a heavy crock, or even a food-grade bucket, and a bag of coarse salt, which costs a few dollars for many pounds. That is the entire investment for the oldest meat preservation system on Earth. If a Depression-era family with nothing could keep a hog through the winter this way, so can you, in an apartment, with a box in the coolest corner you've got. Next, understand the north wall. Every house has one side that stays cooler, the side the sun never fully hits. In the old days, people stored perishables against the north wall of the house, in the coolest corner of the coolest room, often the floor, because cold air sinks and pools low. Before you spend $1, walk your home with a cheap thermometer, the kind you might already have in a drawer, and find your coldest spot. You'll be surprised. There's almost always a corner or a closet or a floor near an outside north wall that runs 10 degrees cooler than the rest of the house. Now here's the one I want you to actually try this week, because it costs you nothing and it teaches your hands the whole principle. Take a clay flower pot, the plain terracotta kind, the unglazed ones you can find at any yard sale or already have out back with a dead plant in it. Soak it in water until it's saturated, then set it upside down over a plate of food, or over a smaller pot, in a shaded spot with a little air moving. As the water slowly evaporates out of the porous clay, it pulls heat away, and the space underneath drops several degrees below the room. People in hot countries have kept food cool this way for thousands of years, and the physics is airtight. Evaporation is cold. It always has been. You don't pay for it, you just have to know how to use it. Wet a cloth, drape it over a covered dish, stand the dish in a shallow tray of water so the cloth wicks it up, put it in a breezy shaded spot, and you've made a cooler with a rag and a bowl. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you this single principle, evaporation makes cold, is the thing that was taken from us, because you cannot sell a customer something he can do with a wet towel. And that, finally, is the door to the method I promised you at the very beginning, the strangest one, the one from Western Australia. Because somebody took this wet cloth idea and turned it into something that could hold real, raw meat safe through a blazing hot summer, with no power, no ice, and no ongoing cost at all. Let me tell you a little something I learned a long time ago. It still works better than anything you can buy in a store today. Let me tell you a little something I learned a long time ago. It still works better than anything you can buy in a store today. Food spoiled in hours. And a man, remembered in the accounts as a railway worker named McCormick, worked out a device so simple and so effective that it spread across an entire continent and kept working right up until electric refrigerators became common decades later. They called it the Cool-Guardy Safe, and here is how it works, because you can build one. You take a simple cabinet, a box with mesh or slatted sides for airflow, standing on legs. On top, you set a shallow tray of water. Over the whole cabinet, you drape hessian, burlap, plain cloth, so that the top edges of the cloth sit in the tray of water. The cloth wicks the water up and down all four sides, so the entire cabinet is wrapped in a wet skin. You stand it in a breezy, shaded spot, ideally where a draft passes through. As air moves across that wet cloth, the water evaporates, and evaporation, as you now know in your bones, pulls heat away. The inside of that safe drops well below the outside air. In a hot, dry climate, it can run 20, even 30 degrees cooler than the room around it. Cool enough to keep butter firm, milk sweet, and yes, meat safe for days at a stretch. Think about what that means. A working man on a goldfield, with no electricity for miles and no money to spare, kept his food safe through summer heat with a box, some cloth, and a tray of water he refilled twice a day. No motor, no compressor, no bill, just water doing what water does. And this wasn't some fringe curiosity. The Coolgardie safe became a standard fixture in Australian homes for the better part of 50 years. Whole generations depended on it. Then the electric refrigerator arrived, the marketing did its work, and this brilliant, free, silent little machine was pushed into the past and nearly forgotten, exactly like Ruth's crock, exactly like the salt box, exactly like every method I've shared with you today. Here's why I saved it for last. You can build a version of this in a weekend, and you can build it from things you already have. A wooden crate or an old wire shelf. A cheap length of burlap, or even old cotton towels or a bedsheet folded thick. A baking tray or a bucket for the water on top. A second tray at the bottom to catch drips. Set it on a porch, in a breezeway, near an open window where the air moves, out of direct sun. Keep the cloth wet and keep it in the draft. That's the entire secret. The moving air is what makes it work, because still air gets damp and stops evaporating, but moving air carries the moisture off and keeps the cooling going. And here's the detail that makes it feel like magic the first time. It works best exactly when you need it most. The hotter and drier the day, the faster the water evaporates, and the faster the water evaporates, the more heat it pulls, so the harder the sun beats down, the harder your little safe works to keep things cold. It's a machine that speeds up in a heat wave. No electric refrigerator on Earth is powered by the very heat it's fighting. This one is. Now I want to put the whole picture together for you, because these methods were never meant to stand alone. They were a system, and the old households used them as a system, each one covering the other's weak spots. The Coolgardie safe holds your fresh meat for the short run, days at a time, so nothing spoils while you decide what to do with it. The salt box takes what you can't eat quickly and pulls the water out of it for the long haul, giving you hams and bacon that keep for months. The smokehouse seals the salted meat's surface and buys you a full year of hanging storage. And the fat crock, the confit, takes cooked meat and locks it airtight under a cap of lard so you can dig into it all winter. Fresh, salted, smoked, sealed. 4 methods, 4 timelines, and together they meant a family never once needed a machine that plugs into a wall. There were smaller tricks stacked around those big 4, and I want to give you a handful because these are the ones that vanished most completely. They wrapped hams in coarse cloth and then in a paper or muslin bag before hanging them, not for flavor, but to keep flies off, because a fly laying eggs was the real enemy of hanging meat. That cloth bag was the difference between a ham that kept and a ham that was ruined. They packed dry-cured pieces in wood ashes or in clean, dry bran or oats, because the dry material wicked away any surface moisture and smothered mold. A crock of lard-sealed sausages, then buried in a barrel of ash, could sit in a cellar all winter. They made a thing called potted meat, which is confit's simpler cousin, where cooked meat is pounded fine, packed tight into small pots, and sealed with a layer of clarified butter or fat. It kept for weeks in a cool larder and made a fast meal on a hard day. They kept a brine crock, a strong saltwater bath called a pickle, sometimes with a little sugar and spice, and they'd drop cuts of meat straight into it. This is corning, the same process behind corned beef. A strong brine, cool storage, and meat that lasts far longer than it has any right to. The rule they used was old and simple. A brine strong enough to float a fresh egg is strong enough to preserve meat. You dissolve salt in water until an egg bobs to the surface instead of sinking, and you've hit the right concentration without needing to measure a thing. That egg trick is centuries old, and it's exactly the kind of hand knowledge that got erased. And they dried it. The simplest method of all, and maybe the most portable. Thin strips of lean meat, salted, hung in dry moving air or over the faint warmth of a low fire until all the moisture was gone and what remained was hard, light, and nearly impossible to spoil. That's jerky, that's biltong, that's pemmican when you pound it with fat. Soldiers, hunters, and whole nations survived winters and long journeys on dried meat because with the water gone, there's simply nothing left for spoilage to feed on. Every one of these is a variation on the same three truths the old folks understood in their hands. Take away the water, take away the air, or take away the heat. Salt and drying take the water, fat and packing take the air. The cellar and the coolguardy safe take the heat. Master those three ideas, and you understand every meat preservation method humans ever invented, including ones I haven't named. I think about what we lost, and it isn't really the recipes, it's the confidence. My Aunt Ruth wasn't afraid of a power outage because a power outage didn't threaten her food. She wasn't at the mercy of anything. She had a cellar full of hams and a crock of pork sealed in lard, and if the lights went out for a week, she'd have shrugged and lit a lamp. That's the thing they actually took when they convinced us the only safe food is food kept cold by a machine we rent from them forever. They took our steadiness. They took the deep down knowing that we can feed ourselves no matter what happens. And I don't think it's too late to take it back, especially not for people our age, because we're the last ones who might still have an Aunt Ruth in the family, a crock in an attic, a memory of a smokehouse out back. We're the bridge. If we don't carry this across, it's gone for good, and the next generation will believe, truly believe, that a person cannot keep meat without electricity. That's a lie. It was always a lie. And now you know it's a lie, and you know exactly how to prove it. So here's what I hope you feel right now. Not that you learned 20 tricks. I hope you feel like something was handed back to you, something that was quietly taken while you weren't looking, and you didn't even know it was missing until this moment. You're the kind of person who's always suspected that a lot of what we were told we needed to buy, we never actually needed. That real knowledge got set aside because free knowledge doesn't sell. If that suspicion has been sitting in you for years, this is your proof, and there's a great deal more where this came from. Now do something for me, because it helps more than you know. I told you about the egg that floats in the brine, the old test for the right salt strength. I want to know if any of you learned that one at a parent's or grandparent's elbow, or if this is the first you've ever heard of it. Tell me in the comments, one word if you want, floated or first. I read them, and it tells me which forgotten pieces are worth digging up next. And tell me where your coldest north corner is, because knowing you actually went and found it means this reached somebody who'll use it. If any of this felt like coming home to something, stay with me, because this isn't a channel, It's a group of us quietly putting back together what got scattered. There are more of these than you'd guess, still waiting, and the folks who are here are the ones keeping them alive. The next one I'm working on is close to this, and it stopped me in my tracks when I found it. There's a way the old farmhouses kept butter and eggs fresh for weeks in the heat of summer, and it involves burying them, sealed, in a place you'd never guess, using a substance most people throw straight in the trash today. I'll tell you the whole thing next time. Until then, go find your cold corner. And remember, they didn't lose this knowledge. It was taken, and you just took it back. This video showed you the idea, but the full salt, smoke, and fat curing methods, the exact ratios, the timing, that wet cloth cooler that's all waiting inside the Wise Living Circle. In there, you can ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be doing this alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen, and you can cancel anytime, one click,